So we have the international legal framework, and then we have the regional legal framework, and then we have the national legal framework, which is within the context of Uganda, closer home. Now, to begin with, if you looked at the international legal framework, you cannot start a discussion without mentioning the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or in short, the UDHR. Now, the UDHR, well, much as it was concluded before many countries in Africa gained independence, but because of the nature of the document and the fact that it contains many of the basic rights that persons are entitled to, both civil and others, you find that it's a very key document. And so, within that document, issues to do with equality and access to justice is very, very important. Because, you know, equality and access can be used interchangeably in certain respects. Because if we talk about equality, that means that everyone has equal access to the court system, to a lawyer, to fair hearing, and things like that. And so that's one of the things which is emphasized within the UDHR. So whether you're a woman, you're a child, or anything, you can still have the equal protection of the law, including accessing the courts of law. Now, next to that, we have the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR, which is also a very, very important document when it comes to this discourse, because it also contains similar provisions to do with the law, and that includes you know, equality still and access to justice. So everyone, again, as per these civil and political rights, is equal, you know, and should have equal access, should have fair hearing, you know. Fair hearing in that if you're taken before a court of law, the person who is sitting as a judge should be impartial, not partial. You know, if the other side, assuming it's a commercial dispute, for example, between two sides, if the other person is able to afford a lawyer, then you should also be afforded a lawyer. When it comes to criminal matters, for example, you see we have the state prosecutes cases. But as a matter of civil rights, you, the person who is accused before a court of law, because the law says you're innocent until proven guilty. Not guilty until proven otherwise.
COVID-19 has tested our hope and faith as individuals, families, and the country at large. Besides destroying many aspects of our lives, the novel coronavirus has also affected our human rights in many ways. You and the Law, the COVID edition, is a 30-minute weekly television program that focuses on the impact of COVID-19 on human rights in Uganda. The program engages experts to explain the importance of rights-based approaches to the success of any public health response to ensure the respect, protection, and fulfillment of human rights amidst the challenges presented by COVID-19. You and the Law, the television program, brought to you by Legal Hub Uganda, taking the law to the last mile in proud association with I4C Africa Hub and House of Talent Television.
There were so many interventions that were put in place. Many of them were rushed, as usual. But I believe this is a learning process for everyone. We have now adopted technology. Like I said earlier, it has been piloted in Kampala. You know, with people appearing via video link, lawyers making their submissions online and things like that. But this needs to be rolled out beyond Kampala. You know,
to Bukedia.
To Bukedia, for example, to a person in Napak, in Kitgum, you know, some of those remote parts of the country. Now, but if we must do this, roll this out to some of these places, then it again calls for government investment. You know, for purpose of the infrastructure, because the technology alone, you know, attracts other costs to do with, you know, the money to pay for, you know, for the service providers,
data,
you know, training, of the lawyers, you know, to utilize the same. And even if you train the lawyers, remember that whereas lawyers are at the forefront of issues to do with access to justice, or among the four court users, the law also allows an individual, for example, to file his case on his own. So how do you cater for a non-lawyer who is willing to file his own case and argue it in courts of law?
Hello viewers, welcome to yet another episode of You and the Law, the COVID edition here on House of Talent Television. As you should know by now, You and the Law is a program that is dedicated to unpacking the law, making you understand the concept of law, explaining to you how the law relates to your everyday life, and generally ensuring that we live a life that respects, that fulfills the requirements of the law. Today, in this edition, we are discussing COVID-19, which has been a series that we're doing under this program. How has COVID-19 affected our lives? Specifically, how has it affected our human rights? And for this particular episode, we're talking about the effect of COVID-19 on the right to access to justice. What does access to justice mean to you? How has it been impacted by this virus? With me in studio is none other than Mr. Emmanuel Elau, the lead attorney at Legal Hub Uganda. Emma, you're welcome to You and the Law.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
How have you been? It's tough time.
Well,
pandemic hovering over our heads. How are you keeping afloat?
Well, the position has never changed. It's always been hard. We have never been considered essential workers this entire time. So as lawyers, I believe, just like the wider population, we have suffered together because we were all locked up at the same space, so nothing to do.
I mean, we talk about the law and the work that you do at Legal Hub Uganda. Maybe you could just throw in one or two lines really about, you know, the things that you do at Legal Hub.
Thanks so much. Legal Hub Uganda is basically focusing on enlightening the people or educating people on issues to do with law.
Yes.
Because one of our slogans is that we want to take the law to the last mile.
Oh, in this country?
Yes.
So quite ambitious, huh?
Yes, so whatever that takes, we are willing to put our lives on the line to ensure that the last person in this country at least gets basic legal information, and that's what pushes us as Legal Hub Uganda every single day.
Yes. Later one I seated here.
Yes.
By mistake. Yes. Yeah. So today we're talking about access to justice. I know that most of the work that you do focuses on enhancing access to justice in this country.
Yes.
But I thought we would start by understanding what access to justice is. How would you explain it? I mean, in You and the Law, we emphasize that we want to make the law digestible to any person.
Yes.
A border rider, teacher, or farmer, anyone. So how would you explain access to justice in the most basic of terms?
Well, thank you. Access to justice has three words, you know. Access, then to, and then justice.
Yes.
Now, justice, when we talk about justice, we're talking about how people, you know, resolve their disputes. Because in everyday life of any ordinary Ugandan, whether as a natural person, as a company, or anything, you realize that at any given time you're likely to have a dispute.
Yes.
Whether at the family level, at your domestic setting, or in business, in employment, or anything. Yeah. It could be land, could be anything. So, if we're talking about the justice issue, justice is applied to the disputes that people have. Now, access is the means, you know, to resolve those disputes, the everyday problems that people face in the legal sense. So how to resolve those disputes, you know, is about the means. So that is what access to justice is about. And as you know, the means of resolving these disputes could be formal or informal. In certain instances, you have the formal structures which have been put in place by the government.
Yes.
And that includes the court system, the LOCs, and many other tribunals that people could take their disputes to. So if it is tax issues, you know, we have the tax appeals, you know, tribunal.
Yes.
If it is electricity, we have other tribunals in place, and many other aspects of life. So that is the formal justice system. And so people who interface with the formal justice issues, formal justice systems in place, will tell you their different experiences. And some of them will tell you not very good stories. Some might have good stories, some might have bad. But I believe the majority might have very bad stories to talk about the justice system, especially depending on who you talk to,
yes,
which is the majority of the Ugandans.
I mean, that is sad coming from a court user like yourself.
Yes.
Emma, what are the barriers, if I'm to ask, that impede people from being able to access justice in this country?
Yes, thank you. If you talk about the barriers, there are quite a number of them.
Yes.
To me, I believe poverty is a very, very important factor in this. I'm aware that last minute did a research, especially to do with access to justice. If you're able to, you can look it up online. And in that discussion, they emphasized the poverty and its implications on access to justice. Because a majority of the Ugandans are living under $2 a day. Yeah. Some might say it's about $1, others might say it's $2 or $1.50. Now, if you were to calculate that money across the 20 working days that we have, that means that people are earning between, probably less than $100.
140.
Yes. Now, if you're earning such monies, and you must approach a lawyer, for example, because the Constitution says that under Chapter 4, fair hearing and all that, equality, it talks, you should be able to access a lawyer when need arises. And if you're unable to, then the state should do so. Now, let's talk about a person who is willing to hire his own lawyer. Yes. Because he thinks the government sponsored lawyer is maybe inefficient. If he's to consult a lawyer for an hour, he needs to pay about 300,000, because the regulations in place that talk about remuneration of lawyers says you should pay a lawyer 75,000 for every 15 minutes.
For every 15 minutes?
Exactly.
75,000?
Yes.
So 1 hour is about 300?
That's 300,000.
Yeah.
And like you may have seen in different instances, at least for a lawyer, if a lawyer is to interact with a potential court user, say a litigant, is able to ask and know that from this person I need to ask him A, B, C, D.
Yes.
These are the relevant facts, this is the relevant evidence that I need, and so he's able to interview. But if a client is allowed, or a potential litigant is allowed to tell a story, say it is a divorce case, this person will start with how they met many years ago, how the relationship went, how they decided to get married. The wedding. Honeymoon. Oh, that entire story. By the time you're done with the story, it's about 4 hours.
Yes.
Now you calculate 3 hours, 300,000 times
1.2 million.
That's 1.2 million. Now, how many people in Uganda can afford that kind of money to pay to a lawyer?
I don't want to be down to do the statistics because they are miserable.
Exactly. So many do not. In fact, even people who are elite, based here in Kampala, the focus should not necessarily be on the people in the rural areas. Even here in Kampala, people cannot actually afford. Yeah. That's why you see, and because of that, you find that some lawyers have also resigned to that fate. So you find that a majority of people now could call a lawyer to conclude a deal in say Cafe Javas or whichever other place they might choose to sit in. And a lawyer is offering advice and so many other things at the cost of a meal, at the cost of a meal which is worth 50,000.
In a pandemic, things are tight.
So it goes both ways.
Yes.
Yeah, but the whole point is that a majority of the people cannot afford, these kinds of money because of the poverty. Yes. And so I know poverty has different shades.
Yes.
So there's so many dimensions that come when talk about poverty.
Some people argue that maybe another problem is the way the profession has been packaged.
Yes.
That you go to court, you see a person wearing something on their head, you can't see mean faces. So basically, the law is not structured to be friendly to people. What do you think of that? The procedures and everything.
Yes, and that's why Legal Hub comes in. Because we try as much as we can to simplify legal information for people. Because we need to demystify a lawyer. We need to demystify the courts in this country. I've been to courts up country, and you find that when litigants are waiting for the magistrate to come, or when they're waiting to enter court in the morning, you realize that litigants come in, then before they enter the courtroom, they, for example, remove their shoes. You know, they remove their shoes as though they're entering a holy place, say a mosque, because it's in a mosque where you should remove your shoes. But you find that because people have a certain construction of who a lawyer is, of what a court is, you know, they take it at a certain level.
They call it a temple of justice.
A temple
maybe that's why.
Maybe
some people think, you know.
So people fear to access, even to approach a lawyer, to approach a magistrate. But I mean, as Legal Hub, we then tell you that these are government institutions. These magistrates and judges are our employees. For as long as you don't go there to bribe them in any way, you're within your rights to access a courtroom, for example. So that's why we come in as Legal Hub and say that let's break it down for you.
Yes.
Let's take away the fear from you. Let's make it, I mean, the law easy. For you, so that tomorrow when you're a potential litigant in the court of law, you should feel free to simply walk to the next lawyer or the next courtroom and urge your case with or without a lawyer.
Very important point there, that court is our facility. Magistrates, judges, everyone there are our employees, so we should be able to reach out to them in case we have an issue that requires their attention. I think that's a good point for us to go for a break. This is You and the Law, the COVID edition here on House of Talent Television. I'm Jonathan Ochomi, your host. Let's go for a break and we'll be right back.
When it comes to the law, we basically live the law, you know, on a day-to-day basis, you know. Whether it is in your bedroom, there is a law that governs it. If you're married, for example, even if you're single, there could be something touching on the law, because you might be in your bedroom with an underage girl, or you might be with another person's wife. You know, all the things are the law. You know.
If you're a human being, you have rights. Those rights are called human rights. They are examples: the right to health, the right to freedom from torture. That underscores human dignity. Freedom from slavery. You're not supposed to be someone's slave.
If you look at our penal code, it sets out another marriage laws. It sets out the persons who can marry and those who cannot marry, right? For example, you can't marry your close relatives. You know, if you did, you'd be committing a crime.
The state is not supposed to tell you who to worship, how to worship, how many times a day. No, you have a right to work. A right to work. You have freedom of association.
Cohabitation for whatever period of time does not make you husband and wife, right? And that is why we emphasize to people that when the relationship is still hot, you know, you must ensure that you do what? Marry.
Yes.
You know.
For human rights to be respected, protected, and fulfilled, relevant government programs must actually work. Medicine should reach hospitals, oxygen should be there, health workers should have gloves, teachers should be present. Now they are mostly absent, and they have left the profession, a good number of them. They are into trading. So things must work. If things don't work, human rights are not respected, are not protected, and are not fulfilled.
COVID-19 has tested our hope and faith as individuals, families, and the country at large. Besides destroying many aspects of our lives, the novel coronavirus has also affected our human rights in many ways. You and the Law, the COVID edition, is a 30-minute weekly television program that focuses on the impact of COVID-19 on human rights in Uganda. The program engages experts to explain the importance of to ensure the respect, protection, and fulfillment of human rights amidst the challenges presented by COVID-19. You and the Law, the television program, brought to you by Legal Hub Uganda, taking the law to the last mile in proud association with I4C Africa Hub and House of Talent Television, coming soon.
Edition here on House of Talent Television. Welcome back from that break. before we went for a break, we're trying to understand this right to access to justice and the issues that actually underlie, that affect people's ability to enjoy this right. So Emma, as before we went for the break, you're highlighting some of these challenges, and I thought you could perhaps carry on from there as we switch gears to another aspect.
Well, so the issues that deny people access are quite a number, like I've stated, some few. But I'll just add one, which is quite obvious to many people. Because as you know, it is the responsibility of government to put up the courts or the court system in different parts of the country. So you realize that until recently, the High Court, for example, was based only here in Kampala.
Yes.
And so that created issues of access. For example, if you're in Karamoja, how then would you come up to Kampala to file a case?
Yes.
I know with the issues of adjournments here and there, it was a bit difficult.
Yeah.
But that is changing a little bit at a slow pace. For example, if you now went to Soroti, you'd find a High Court statute in Soroti.
Okay.
However, that statute has a very huge area that is handling.
Yes.
The whole of Teso and Karamoja. So if you're in Karamoja, still you have issues to do with access.
Over.
Yes, because that's over 100 kilometers that you should travel. And so again, connecting with poverty, first you need transport, you need to hire a lawyer, which lawyers are mostly in Soroti. I need to come to Soroti to interact with the lawyer. So it creates some problems, and I'm aware that the Chief Justice has been advocating for more and more courts to be established in different parts of the country to ease access to some of these courts.
Yeah, I mean, luckily for Karamoja sub-region, there's now a good road connecting Soroti and Moroto.
Yes.
Hopefully to help to, lower down the cost. So we need to switch gears a little bit and talk about the law. You've explained access to justice, but what gives it the force for us to speak to it as a right?
Yes. Now, talking about the law or the legal framework to do with the access to justice, we have different laws at different levels that cater for this. And so we have the international legal framework, and then we have the regional legal framework, and then we have the national legal framework, which is within the context of Uganda, closer home.
Yeah.
Now, to begin with, if you looked at the international legal framework, you cannot start a discussion without mentioning the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or in short, the UDHR. Now, the UDHR, well, much as it was concluded before many countries in Africa gained independence, but because of the nature of the document and the fact that it contains many of the basic rights that persons are entitled to, both civil and others, you find that it's a very key document. And so, within that document, issues to do with equality and access to justice is very, very important. Because, equality and access can be used interchangeably in certain respects. Because if we talk about equality, that means that everyone has equal access to the court system, to a lawyer, to fair hearing, and things like that. And so that's one of the things which is emphasized within the UDHR. So whether you're a woman, you're a child, or anything, you can still have the equal protection of the law, including accessing the courts of law. Now, next to that, we have the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR, which is also a very, very important document when it comes to this discourse, because it also contains similar provisions to do with the law, and that includes equality still and access to justice. So everyone, again, as per these civil and political rights, is equal, and should have equal access, should have fair hearing, fair hearing in that if you're taken before a court of law, the person who is sitting as a judge should be impartial, not partial. If the other side, assuming it's a commercial dispute, for example, between two sides, if the other person is able to afford a lawyer, then you should also be afforded a lawyer. When it comes to criminal matters, for example, you see we have the state prosecutes cases. But as a matter of civil rights, you, the person who is accused before a court of law, because the law says you're innocent until proven guilty. Not guilty until proven otherwise. Now, guilty until proven otherwise gives rise to mob justice and the like. So because we want to avoid that, we treat you as innocent until a case is proven. So if you're facing a capital offense, that means that if you can't afford a lawyer, then we should hire one for you at the expense of the state. The other laws in place, including the that deals with economic, social, and cultural rights.
Yeah, the convention.
The convention on those rights. Of course, a debate could arise as to whether economic, social, and other rights can be justiciable in courts of law, whether you can litigate based on that. In Uganda, if I may talk about our context here, there's been a bit of litigation on economic aspects. And we have seen courts in the past, not just in Uganda, but other places as well, saying that this is a political question.
You cannot...
courts cannot interfere because it has issues to do with resource allocation.
Yes.
If you want to put a hospital here, government must allocate resources.
Yeah.
If you want to put a road, if you want to build a court, it has cost implications. So courts have been shy to enter into this.
Keyword shy.
Yes.
Yes.
But I believe this is going to change with time, and so these rights will be emphasized in courts of law as well.
Yeah. Can you then switch maybe to a little bit of our context, Africa, whatever?
Yes.
Any frameworks along those lines?
Thank you. So if you coming back to Africa, we have a very important instrument that caters for these rights. And this is the African Charter on Human and People's Rights.
Yes.
This is a very important instrument to us because it caters to the African context. Why do I say so? Many people have lauded this instrument because it, for example, emphasizes issues to do with the family as the basic unit of society, as opposed to other international instruments that talk about the individual as the basic unit of society. But it's a whole debate which we may not go into in terms of access to justice. But if you looked at other parts of this instrument as well, it emphasizes equality and access to justice. Same issues to do with fair hearing, So that's a very important aspect.
Okay. I need us to move home because how are we doing as a country in as far as providing for this right?
Yeah. So if you come back to Uganda, in our context here, you realize that the first major law that we shall be talking about is the Constitution of Uganda of 1995. Now, in the Constitution of Uganda, this being the supreme law, if you look at the first articles, power belongs to the people, the Constitution is supreme, and any other law which is inconsistent with that Constitution is null and void. So, if the Bible that you subscribe to or the Quran is inconsistent with the Constitution, then the Constitution will take precedence. But of course, again, we can't get into that debate because some people's feelings might be injured.
Temperatures could rise.
Yes. So we can avoid that. But the whole point is the Constitution is supreme. And if you look at under Chapter 4, it emphasizes the rights of the people. It tells you that the rights are inherent and not granted by the state. That means that you're born with certain rights.
Yes.
The state doesn't give you. It talks about the right to fair hearing.
Yes.
The right to fair hearing is a wide concept. But most importantly, for you to be afforded this right to fair hearing, there has to be equality, between the two parties, because the state is the one that is responsible for upholding or for ensuring observance of these rights.
That's right, yes.
So that means that if the state has the capacity to prosecute you because it has all the statutory apparatus and all that to apprehend you, then at least you should be afforded the ability to defend yourself.
To fight with a powerful entity.
Exactly.
Okay.
And part of that ability to defend yourself is being afforded a lawyer, if you cannot afford one. So that's why we say in the Constitution that if, in the Constitution and other laws, if you're unable to hire a lawyer, then the state comes in and affords for you a lawyer.
At its cost.
At its own cost, at the cost of the government or the people of Uganda. But of course, again, that creates other issues because if you hire a pro bono lawyer for somebody, the efficiency of the service that person is likely to get is not as good as the efficiency of a lawyer who has
Why is that the case?
Because a private lawyer, if you've hired your own lawyer, you're able to pay whatever the lawyer desires.
Yes.
So a lawyer could say, pay me 10 million to handle this matter. Maybe based on the rules on payment of lawyers. 10 million, as opposed to a government lawyer who is being paid 150,000.
In a file, for one file?
For one file, to handle a murder case.
Ooh.
Now, you know what a murder case means?
Yeah.
It means that there's a life on the line. So if somebody didn't commit a crime, and you're hiring for that person a lawyer at 150,000, then there could be problems. you know.
Okay.
So
any other law?
But that's it basically with the constitution, okay, and the right to fair hearing. But there are other laws as well that come into play. For example, we have the Advocates Act.
Yes.
The Advocates Act is a very important document again also locally here because it regulates lawyers. It mandates lawyers on how to conduct, their affairs. There are other regulations that arise from, from the Advocates Act. For example, those that deal with pro bono.
Yes.
Pro bono is basically a free service that every lawyer is mandated to do, But as to whether lawyers actually take up those hours or not is another matter for.
But at least the provision exists.
Yes, but the law exists,
Okay,
and lawyers should be upholding it.
Okay.
But there are other laws that come into play, like the Children's Act, the Persons with Disabilities Act, and the like. But because of time, probably we may not go into that.
So now then, COVID-19 comes and things get a little bit distorted. And as a lawyer, as a social justice lawyer, focusing on access to justice and human rights, how has COVID-19 interfered with the right to access to justice? If you have to give your analysis.
I mean, COVID-19 from its advent has immensely, affected, access to justice in different ways, both positive and negative. So you realize that as a result of the interventions, the panic, I'd use the word panic because COVID basically just arrived here and people were saying that there are going to be bodies on the streets of different countries in Africa specifically because they said we couldn't afford to pay for these vaccines and the like. So as a result of the panic that happened, government locked down the country in last year. And with that, many lawyers were kept at home. Actually, lawyers were kept at home because they were never considered essential workers.
Yes.
It only took the intervention of the Uganda Law Society for this to somehow be relaxed. So lawyers were at home, but people were still being arrested.
So we had work, but we couldn't.
Yes. So people were still locked up, in different places. So they could not access their lawyers. They could not easily get bail. Because if you need bail, you need to have sureties.
Yes.
So if you don't have sureties, it becomes a bit difficult. For you're locked up in prison, you can't access your lawyer and you can't access your relatives who should be able to mobilize for you the means to get out of that place. The courts of law were largely locked up. They only maintained courts of law open for purposes of plea taking, those who had freshly committed offenses, and also for bail. But like I've said, bail also was affected because you couldn't then access sureties and things like that. Again, because of movement, even if government tried to introduce technology to address issues of those that needed to get bail, for example, the technology that we're talking about is mostly in Kampala because they're trying to pilot it here. How about
still experimenting?
Yes. How about a person who is in a court in Soroti or in Gulu? Did he have the same ability to get out and argue his case for bail?
That is if they have the MBs.
That's if they have the, so that created a problem. So on top of the poverty that we had already talked about as an issue to do with access to justice, on top of poverty, on top of the distance to courts, on top of people's ignorance, now you have a lockdown which created all these other scenarios and therefore making it very difficult for people to access justice. Yeah.
So essentially you're saying everything that was done sort of had that effect. But then we need to understand some of the government measures that were put in place to curb down the spread of COVID-19, but also understand then your assessment of how did they try to protect the right to access to justice. Yeah. Because government was busy giving out food and everything. Are there any measures that you think were actually specific and were aimed at protecting this right?
Well, the government tried to embrace technology.
Yes.
But technology also comes with its own weaknesses, like I highlighted. Because then what would happen is that whereas you have technology, some parts of the country could not access this technology. For example, for people to do the needful so as to access justice. So that became a very major challenge. and also an intervention. But also, how do you reconcile the fact that you have LOCs in some parts that should be addressing certain issues,
yes,
but they were unable to convene because of the SOPs that were in place. So this created a bit of challenges here and there.
People say that some of the things government did, like getting people out of prison for some cases, was commendable. I don't know what your view.
Well, I think that was also a positive thing that government did, because we all know that there's a problem of congestion in our prison system in this country. So by releasing some people, I think that was a positive, because in as much as it doesn't address the bigger problem in terms of congestion, which might need the construction of other prisons, but at least it lessened the burden on the already burdened system.
Okay.
Of course, coupled with the government's efforts to when to say that no more arrests should be conducted, especially for those that violate curfew regulations. They should basically pay money and go home, as opposed to going to prison.
I mean, that also raises other justice issues, because talk about access, they have the means to actually pay the fine, but maybe that's where we'll pick on this conversation. We here today with Emmanuel Elau from Legal Hub Uganda to examine how COVID-19 has impacted the right to access to justice. Let's go for a short break and we'll be right back. You're watching You and the Law, the COVID edition here on House of Talent Television. Welcome back from that short break, where we're picking on a conversation this day with Mr. Emmanuel Elau from Legal Hub Uganda to explain to us how COVID-19 has affected the right to access to justice in Uganda. So Emma, before we went for a break, we were trying to examine some of the measures that government put in place to cap down COVID-19, but at the same time specifically ensure that people are able to access justice in this period.
Yes.
So you gave us a picture of some of the things that were done around prisons, around keeping courts open and stuff like that. But I'm wondering, were there success in your view? And then if not, or where are the areas that you think we could improve or that could have been improved?
Okay, I think there were so many interventions that were put in place. Many of them were rushed, as usual. But I believe this is a learning process for everyone. We have now adopted technology. Like I said earlier, it has been piloted in Kampala. With people appearing via video link, lawyers making their submissions online and things like that. But this needs to be rolled out beyond Kampala.
Yes.
To Bukedia, for example, to a person in Napak, in Kitgum, some of those remote parts of the country.
Yes.
Now, but if we must do this, roll this out to some of these places, then it again calls for government investment.
Yes.
For purpose of the infrastructure, because the technology alone, attracts other costs.
Yes.
To do with, the money to pay for, for the service providers.
Data,
training of the lawyers, to utilize the same. And even if you train the lawyers, remember that whereas lawyers are at the forefront of issues to do with access to justice, or among the four court users, the law also allows an individual, for example, to file his case on his own. So how do you cater for a non-lawyer who is willing to file his own case and argue it in courts of law? Because just a few days ago, the judiciary was training lawyers on the usage of the new technologies, systems that have been put in place. But then how do you extend this to the last person who might also want to file his own case?
Yes.
So that is likely to cause certain issues. How about the remote areas? Because whereas there's been a lot of coverage in terms of mobile network and things like that, you can realize that some places are still remote.
Yes.
They can't access technology. Issues to do with phones and data and things like that. And also, how many people out there can afford to put data in their phone and argue their case? Because we already talked about poverty, which is affecting. So whereas we're adopting the technology, in some ways it might also become a barrier. So government needs to prepare, the court users to be able to, to utilize this technology which has been put in place. And also alongside that, we need to prepare better next time. We should not be panicking. We're all together.
Yes.
Second lockdown, when it came up, we all stayed at home while our litigants were in prison and other places. Even when they are allowed lawyers to work, they said you had to apply for a permit, or a license from Uganda Law Society. So that means if your client is arrested now, you'd have to wait for 24 hours or more to get a clearance from Law Society for you to move from one place to another. And yet lawyers play a critical role. So I think government should not downplay the role of the lawyers. They should be left to work. They should be left to assist the people, because crimes are still committed even when people are in lockdown.
Yes.
You realize that there was a spike, for example, in domestic violence cases.
True.
Between men and women and vice versa. And also against the children. So all these are crimes, and therefore people kept getting arrested and locked up. So they needed to have a lawyer by their side at that critical moment. Because at that moment I could consider you to be in ICU. So in ICU you need a doctor.
Yes.
So in this case also you need a lawyer if you interface with the law during this lockdown. Yeah.
Some people have argued that perhaps one of the best ways we could have handled this issue was a sort of enhanced access to justice, was to promote the use of the non-judicial quote-unquote options outside court. And I read a paper that was emphasizing the need for strengthening the local council courts to work during such times. What's your view on some of those proposals of expanding the options of people, of justice seekers in this country beyond the courtroom?
Yes, thank you. So you realize that there are two ways that disputes could be resolved.
Yes.
Either through the formal justice systems, which is more pronounced, or the informal justice systems. As Legal Hub, we did some research about a year or so ago. And our findings were, for example, that a majority of the people were resolving their disputes through LOCs, the church leaders, the cultural leaders. In as much as these are important, I believe they were left out because they were locked up. So once they were locked up, LOCs were not operating.
Yes.
And then when you look at the Domestic Violence Act, for example, it says that once you've been violated or you've been violently attacked by a spouse, the first place you need to report to is an LOC, because they had the jurisdiction to entertain these matters. But because of the lockdown, now an LOC cannot convene. But I believe some lessons were learned at some point, and now you see people can convene as long as they can observe the social distancing aspect of this. So once they're able to, the LOCs and other justice actors, informal justice actors, are able to observe the SOPs, then now they should be able to intervene in several matters. And with that, there should be a reduction in the number of cases that are lagging behind as a result of COVID. Yeah.
And as we talk about COVID-19 access to justice, which is a human right, we are always very keen to emphasize the obligations of the government to protect these rights. And from the access to justice angle, what are these obligations, for protecting the right to access to justice?
Yeah, so like you've rightly stated, the government has obligations, and these are three, mainly. That is, the government has the obligation to respect, to protect, and to fulfill. Now, respecting in the first place is important, because this means that there are laws in place that have been passed by the relevant organs of the government, which is the legislature, and through delegated legislation, other bodies. Now, if we have the laws in place and says that, for example, citizens have a right to life, have a right to personal liberty, then it means that the government must respect those what? Those rights which are already in place.
So should not be the one...
Yes. Right now, we're hearing issues to do with bail as a very serious discussion. How does the government intervene? Should we do away with the bail? For now, you've seen what has been happening. Someone is released by a competent court. Next, he has been rearrested over other issues. And then to protect and then to fulfill. So government has a very critical role to play in ensuring that all this happens in all the ways that they should.
Okay, you're really focusing, rather highlighting very important aspects that I think all stakeholders need to be aware of, especially in the context of protecting this right. Like, what do we need to do, and what does who need to do to ensure that people's rights are protected, specifically the right to access to justice, which is perhaps one of the biggest justice problems in this country. So Emma, as we come to the end of this program, what are like your parting shots? How do we move forward as a country in the next maybe 30 seconds as we bring this to an end?
Well, I think we need to prepare better for the next potential pandemics that could occur. We can't rule out the possibility, so we need to prepare better for all those potential eventualities coming in place. We need to embrace technology. We need to sensitize our people, and that's why Legal Hub comes in, so that we ensure that people have at least some basics when it comes to the law, so as to enhance their own access to justice.
The point has been made and it's very clear. We need to respect people's rights. We need to educate people about their rights. We need to invest as a government in the necessary infrastructure to protect access to justice, especially during pandemics like this. With that, viewers, we come to the end of today's episode of You and the Law, the COVID edition. I've been your host, Jonathan Ochom, and we've been having Mr. Emmanuel Elau from Legal Hub Uganda. Next time, we will talk about another right that has been affected by this pandemic. So continue watching House of Talent Television to know what that is. Until then, bye.